Greetings and welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be playing basing, and I had a little bit of a search around on the internet and came across a channel called Midwinter Minis, and they had a section where they'd done a whole pile of bases based on all different home available materials like tree bark and twigs and toilet paper and cat litter and herbs and tea bags and rice. But they had one individual video based solely upon using coffee, dried ground coffee. And so looking at that, I thought I could give that a red hot go. And so all I did was collect some coffee, spread it out on a bit of tin foil and whack it into the oven after it had been used to cook something, and leave it there overnight just to let it thoroughly dry out, and you end up with a nice granular type powder. And now Midwinter Mini suggested to use poster paint, black paint or something like that, but I thought I'd use Mod Podge because it's more of an adhesive glue. I thought it might grip a bit better. I wasn't too worried about the colouring because it's going to get painted after all. And I started off with a 50-50 mix just on a mixing palette and mixed that together, and once it was all thoroughly mixed together, it appeared that it was probably a little bit too runny still. So the idea was, let's add a bit more coffee to that to make it a little bit more granular. So worked out roughly 2 to 1 of coffee to the Mod Podge to create a better usable mixture, which once it was finished was quite tacky. It's kind of like freestanding. It's like checking whipped cream. It was able to stand up on its by itself. So I thought, well, that seems a reasonable consistency to use. And then we tried applying it to the base. Started off just smearing it on. Now this obviously is the starter set, and the little guys have the hexagonal pegs in their feet, so they're kind of already on. And I thought I would build the base up around the 2 feet, so it looked like they were in and on the substrate. And it is a little bit fiddly when you're trying to work around their legs. Clearly it would be a lot simpler if you were to just apply it without them physically sitting on it, but you've got the likelihood then of filling the hole. So you've just got to be a little bit pedantic about how you do it. Now the first application, the material sort of, it's a bit runny, does lift off. You've got to sort of smear it on to make sure it grips the base, and sort of somewhat tacky and not simple to use. Clearly a screwdriver probably wasn't the best implement, but it was simple and clean, easy to clean off, so I thought, no, that might do the job. So I gave that a bit of a go, and it had a reasonable result. Just cleaning off around the edges, obviously there's a bit of overspill, so you can just wipe that off relatively simply when it's still moist, and it doesn't cause too much of a problem. So it takes a couple of minutes, as you can see, just to apply it to one, so that wasn't too bad. But what I began to notice as I progressively went along was that the consistency started to dry. So I haven't used Mod Podge before, obviously hadn't tried using it as a basing compound mixed with something else, but what you start to notice is that it starts to lose the liquid nature and starts to become more like a porridge, and therefore you only have a limited working time to achieve the results that you're after. So I'd probably recommend just mixing a small amount, like a couple of tablespoons, because you've only got maybe 10 or so minutes before the material starts to lose its glisten and become quite matte, and then you're actually not going to be able to play with it and manipulate it on the model. So what I thought, once I'd had some on there, I had some loose sprue, and I just cut up some chips off of that to stick into the base to look like either rubble or material debris, something like that. So just irregular shapes and pieces just randomly scattered over the surface, which then can be painted up either as some either metal or rocks, depending upon how you want them to look. So I just randomly scatter them over the base, and because it's a glue type material, it will adhere to that, and it seems to capture it quite well once it's dried. So I just did that across the bases. I had a few to do, and you can see as it starts to dry out, it starts to become quite hard and more difficult to apply to the base, and you can see that the color changes and it looks more granular. and that's something just to be aware of as you are using it. But once it's all done, you can then just sprinkle on your bits and pieces as I did, which was just applying a very random scattering of different sizes. And I found that perhaps it was probably logical just to put a little bit of the material over the top just to bind them in as well, and also make it look like they've sunken into the actual texture a bit more. But other than that, it seemed like it worked relatively well. Here's a few scarabs on their base with some material below. And ultimately, when I was all done, we had, after overnight drying, a rather dark looking texture that was finished, quite granular, looking coarse, but not like sand. The good thing is it's not as heavy either. It still had a bit of a glossy texture to it. I didn't find there was any shrinkage that developed. You can see here that one there and the one below it are very glossy. I actually added a little bit more Mod Podge to that, making it a runnier material, and so you end up with a glossier, lighter coloured finish because of the difference in the mixture consistency. But at the end of the day, it didn't seem to be a problem, because once everything was painted up, it wasn't really easy to determine that there was any difference between them. But all in all, I was quite happy with the end result of those. And once we applied a quick primer to the minis and the bases, it all looks quite uniform. You can't really tell what it's made of, other than you just have some sort of material that the guys are all standing on. So quite happy with the end result. Thanks Midwinter Minis for giving us the idea of using coffee. I'll certainly be using it a bit more. It's something that's freely available, so quite useful as a material. Just be aware of the drying time. But other than that, fantastic effort. And thanks everyone for joining in. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you on the next one. Thank you.